Hi, Sarah. Good to see you.
Hi there. Hi, Sue. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much on this rainy Friday for attending our CFE community chat. This is our 9th and final one in our school year series, which is pretty amazing. It's a program that just kind of came together. We weren't expecting it. We didn't really know what to expect, and it's been wonderful. So thank you so much for coming today. We are very, very happy to have all of you here. I'm sure at this point, everyone is all too familiar with Zoom etiquette. Please remember though to mute your microphones throughout the course of the meeting. We will have a presentation for about 40 or 45 minutes, so it's really helpful if you keep your microphones muted that entire time. If you have specific questions during the presentation itself, we ask that you utilize the chat box, and throughout the course of the presentation, I'll be collecting those, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. During the Q&A though, we ask that you utilize that raise your hand function. You can still utilize the chat box, but it's just sometimes a little bit easier to hear you ask your question in your own words with your own voice. Also, just as a heads up, the call is being recorded. It will be available along with a PowerPoint presentation and any associated resources early next week on our website. And then finally, please keep an eye out in the chat box today during the presentation for some helpful messages from Jamila, who's one of our CFE team members. She'll just kind of be reminding you about the recording and that all of the materials, all of the resources will be available next week. So, all right, let's get into it. Today we have two presenters. One is Nilufar Rezai. After working as a school counselor at a PK-5 Chicago Public School for more than 4 years, she was promoted in October 2016 to the role of SEL specialist in the CPS Department of Personalized Learning. Since college, she's worked as a K-12 educator, teacher trainer, mental health professional, and curriculum designer, and presented at local, state, and international conferences. She's an advocate for social justice, youth empowerment, and the social, emotional, and spiritual education of children and adolescents. Her co-presenter today is Syda Segovia Taylor. She has 25 years of experience connecting opportunities with Black and Latinx youth and families in Chicago. She's the founder and executive director of Organic Oneness, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the interconnectedness of all people in the earth through community training sessions, programs, and events. Syda has experience directing programs for several nonprofits, including Project Exploration, Quad Communities Development Corporation, After School Matters, and the Chicago Park District. We are so thrilled to have both of them with us, again, for our final community chat for the school year series. And I will throw it over to the two of them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to dialogue with you today and hope you'll leave with tangible steps that you can take to make an impact towards a more just society. A few words before we begin, and just going back to the first slide, you'll notice that we made a change to our title. Instead of Educators for Equity and Justice, we're calling it Educators for Justice, because as we were doing research for today's presentation, we realized that justice is the ultimate goal that we're working towards, and equity is one step towards justice. Also, another clarification in our title, the new normal has a double meaning. The obvious one, of course, is due to COVID, we've all experienced social distancing, remote learning, and obsessive levels of hygiene in unprecedented ways. The other new normal is that while civil unrest and the fight for social justice has existed in our country for in various forms for the past 400 years, this time it feels different. This time we won't be going back to business as usual because there's a heightened awareness and sense of urgency that seems to be shifting mindsets and behaviors on a deeper level. So now we can go to our who we are. We thought before we dive into what it means to take an anti-racist stance, we wanted to tell you a little bit more about how Syda and I know each other and what brought us to this topic. So here you'll see just symbols that represent us. We are both Baha'is, which is the 9-pointed star there at the top. We both worked at CPS at the same time. I am in the personalized learning department as an SEL specialist, and Syda was in the FACE department as a FACE manager. And we're both at Organic Oneness. I am on the board of directors, and Syda is the executive director for Organic Oneness. And what drives us is our belief in the oneness of humankind, and that service is the way to transform society. So we've participated in interfaith marches together, racial healing circles and conferences. We've organized prayer and reflection gatherings, youth development projects, and presentations on topics that promote the betterment of humanity. So that's kind of us in a nutshell.
For those of you that don't know FACE, it stands for Family and Community Engagement in Education. Thank you, Nilufar.
Sure.
So in our talk and in our experience, we just want to share that we're not experts. All of us are learning together, and we always want to share what we've learned and have a dialogue with everybody else's experience with what we talk about. And so that's what we're here to offer today, is just what we've seen, what we've experienced, what we've read about, hoping that it'll help everyone move along this continuum. And so in doing community work, if we want to move things forward and it have a sustainable change, every level has to have the same goal and the same mindset. So that is, you know, from the individual, the community, and the institution. So those three entities, in order for us to move forward, they have to be in alignment, or else you're going to be bumping up a whole bunch of barriers that will stop healing and justice from happening. So these three questions: how do your biases, identities, and personal stories impact how you see students who are different from you? So that's the individual. How can you create a classroom that builds trust, promotes healing, and ensures underrepresented students and their families are heard, seen, and valued? So that's the community level. So in this case, the individual is the teacher, the community we're looking at as the classroom, the institution level, we're looking at the school. And then you can transfer these to other scenarios. But in this case, that's what we're looking at. And the last one is, how can you advocate for your school building to disrupt racism and promote responsive and timely, equitable policies and practices? And so with these three things in mind, as we go throughout the presentation, always keep this in your head. Okay, how does this align with the individual? How does it align with the community? How does it align with the institution? Because those three things are what we need to change. And as just an individual, before I move on to the next slide, we have to really change our hearts and our minds, because we run the community and we run the institutions. So if the individual's hearts and minds, mindsets, and behaviors are not you know, working towards a just, or looking through a just lens, none of it is going to change. And so we want to move beyond having good intentions, and we want to have good impact. So move along that continuum. Well, I tried to, and I thought if I did this, we now have to say, okay, how did I impact my community, and how are my individual behaviors impacting everyone else? And so now look at the results of your intentions, your behaviors, instead of just what you're trying to do.
All right, so before we begin discussing the strategies that can help transform yourself, your classroom community, and your school and neighborhood towards justice, we thought it was important to frame what we mean by all these terms. And this 3-minute video explains the origin of the word race, which is actually a man-made concept. So as you watch it, we're asking you to feel free to chat in the chat box something that resonates with you or that you didn't know before, just to kind of engage that dialogue. So Syda is going to.
Can you hear
You
it?
may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled Black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you are of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the US needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be Black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was Black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent. But the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
Thank you, Syda. Can you go back to the slide we were on? I just want to point out something. Every slide, almost every slide in our presentation, you'll see a source at the bottom. So if you are very interested in this topic and want to learn more about it, feel free to go, when you get this presentation, to go back to these links in order to dive in more. Okay, now we can go forward. And as no one typed into the chat box, I don't want anybody to think that I'm not hearing them. We can keep moving in through our presentation. So you'll notice the next couple of slides that we have are basically a list of terms and their definitions. We thought it was really important for us to level set and all be on the same page when we talk about these concepts. And given that these are very common terms and that you may be hearing a lot about them these days, we wanted to make sure that we provided this information to you. And you'll notice again, when you get this PowerPoint and you click on the word, that will also take you to another article or video that goes into more depth about what it means. I do want to point out one of the terms that wasn't mentioned in the video, but is what they were talking about, when those Europeans in the 1700s came up with the concept of race, they were resolving what is called cognitive dissonance, which is when their thoughts and beliefs are mismatched with reality. So they try to make up a story in order to find congruence. So the story was, well, if we believe all humans are created equal, yet we have people that we're buying and selling and treating like animals, then we're going to make up this theory that says, well, of course we can do that because whites are superior and can, and blacks are inferior and thus should deserve to be treated this way. So that theory was designed just to be able to resolve the cognitive dissonance that the Europeans felt at that time. And so you can learn more about that again if you go into that link. And we'll come back to those terms throughout our presentation. So if it comes up again, we'll say, don't forget to check out, microaggression in the slide. Okay, sorry, slide.
Oh, that was great. So this slide, I love seeing it. And I love how just as throughout time, the slide has changed and evolved with our understanding with race and what it means to be just or equal. And so throughout humanity, if you look at history, we fought for different things, but when we got to that place, it's like, wait, that's not enough. Wait, we need this instead. And so just know that as humanity is developing and we're evolving as people towards, us being at this peaceful place, we have to go through this continuum. And so I encourage everybody to just stay in the room when it gets uncomfortable and figure it out. A lot of us have different ways of dealing with conflict, and a lot of people have truth before peace. They need the truth before they could get to a peaceful place, but then other people have to have peace in order to get to the truth. So when you're in this uncomfortable space, ask yourself, what am I feeling and what do I need to move forward? So with this, the first box, equality, everybody was like, yes, of course, everybody needs the same thing. Everybody, should have the same thing. And so everyone was fighting for that. But then we realized because of the way this country was built was primarily all the institutions against people of color. So that's something, if you haven't relooked at history, what ended up happening in building this country, it was for white men to succeed and to move forward. So that was the price. Everything's built for white men to succeed. So everyone else is kind of left out of that scenario. So that our school system, our policing, everything is with the mindset of how do we make life better for white men. So in learning that, we're like, okay, well, equality isn't enough because other communities haven't had the same opportunities. So we're not coming in at the same place. We're coming in at different entry points. So then we look at equity. Okay, here we are at equity. How about we look at what communities have, and then we'll redistribute the resources according to the needs. So that's where we are right now. That's where we are. Okay, let's redistribute everything, and that will take care of the problem. But that's not enough. People are learning now that we're in that place. What actually needs to happen is, why don't we remove the barriers? So now we're moving into liberation. Why don't we remove the barriers that is causing everybody not to move forward? So we need to figure out what are the barriers so that people can fulfill their purpose in life and have what everybody wants, and then that will solve it. But if you look at liberation, that's still not enough, because why aren't they sitting in the stands with everybody else? Why are they in the outfield? Why are they not a part of the groups? So let's relook at that, and let's look at social justice. So social justice, that's where we have to move to. And I'm sure when we get to social justice, there's going to be a new term and a new way and a new thing for us to figure out. But just know that this is a continuum of learning, of humanity evolving, of us developing as one global society. And so with that mindset, we need to figure out how do we move quickly, because people's lives are in danger constantly. So how do we move quickly through this continuum? And it's only going to move quickly when we're all on board with the same thing. Again, the individual, the community, the institution, they all need to be in alignment. And so, so that's that. And you want to add anything, Nilufar? Did I miss
No. Okay. The reason it's blank is because we're building it right now. We don't know what it looks like yet.
Yeah, we don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
I can't wait till we get there. And so these are just some of the terms that we just saw. So I do want to point out liberation. You know, we're all talking about equity and the redistribution and guarantee of fair treatment, but then liberation is the act of setting someone free from imprisonment, slavery, and oppression. So oppression, you know, is something that people feel in everyday life because of the way our institutions and the way society's built. All of America is based on a European model, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But when you don't understand what that is, then you're constantly being told that you're wrong, and that's oppression. So we want to move towards social justice, where people are looking through a fair and just lens that's reasonable. You know, there's a distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within society that everyone is benefiting from. And then, of course, cultural competency and anti-racism. Those are things that we're definitely moving towards, and hoping that everybody continues that learning. So in terms of individual transformation.
All right, so this is the continuum that Syda referred to with that previous graph. And this also kicks off our conversation about how to champion anti-racism by transforming ourselves. So we thought we would turn this popular Facebook image into a self-assessment poll. And as I read through a few of the descriptions for each of the 3 categories, please think about where you find yourself falling within these categories, because we're going to do a poll based on what's written here. So just read and listen at the same time. So the fear zone is kind of like this first stage where a lot of people might be avoiding the topic, or they might deny that racism is a problem, or they talk only to people who look and think like them. The learning zone is where you now are beginning to question, and you're curious, and you're recognizing that racism is a problem, and you're beginning to ask questions where you feel uncomfortable. You might be more aware and vulnerable about your own biases, so on and so forth. Growth zone is where you're actually actively going out and promoting and advocating. You're sitting with your discomfort, like what Syda was saying earlier. You surround yourself with people who think and look different than you. You educate others about the difficult past that this country and where we are currently. And then you also recognize how you benefit from racism, like how you are on the receiving end of privilege. So we're going to ask dear Jamila to put up a poll. And again, this is anonymous, but go ahead and kind of rate yourself on where you think you fall. And then we'll look at the results really quickly together. So Jamila, go ahead, please, and share the poll. And you all have like 10 seconds to vote.
Do you see the poll?
Do you see it? Do you see the poll? Oh, okay, it's coming.
Minor technical difficulty.
Okay. Good.
Not a Zoom call if something like weird doesn't happen. So
it's a good thinking time.
The least weird it could be.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
so
it's loading. Okay.
not loading. So I don't.
That's all right.
I want it to be anonymous, so I don't
Yeah,
necessarily.
that's all right. Yeah, yeah. We don't want anybody to identify themselves. So, but anyhow, keep that in mind, right? Keep this as kind of your own baseline assessment of where you are today. And then hopefully by the end of our presentation, maybe you've moved further along on the continuum. Okay. All right. Syda, next slide.
Yeah. So another thing to look at, as Nilufar said, you know, it's about who you surround yourself with. What are you doing? So that's in the growth zone, and we with everything that we're learning, we have to practice to get better at it, right? Like we're gonna go through this kind of fumbling stage. When you think of a baby that's learning how to walk, it's first like, okay, I'm crawling, I got to figure out how to move these muscles, I got to, you know, do this whole thing, and then you start to walk, you fall down, you walk, you fall down, you walk, you fall down until you master it. It's the same thing with anything that we try. And so again, I'm asking everybody to continue on a daily basis, to dedicate time, your space, your energy into figuring this out so that you could be a part of the dialogue and be a part of the solutions. And so one thing is to really evaluate who's around you, who is in your family, because if you're not around a group of diverse people, what you're going off of is what the media is telling you, hearsay, stereotypes, things that might be myths within your family, and you want to really debunk them. You want to get to a place where you can judge things with your own heart and your own mind and make a sound decision based on facts and based on your connection with people. That's the most important thing. If your heart is not connected to others, you're always going to be having this biased way of thinking of people. Mm-hmm. And this is everybody. This is, we're swimming in a arena that is not healthy in any way. Our health, the way we think, the way we act, it's not a healthy pool that we're swimming in. So we have to actively figure out what is that healthy spot. And so in evaluating yourself, who do I hang around with? Is it diverse? I want you to look at your text right now in your phone. So grab your phone. Everyone grab your phone. And just the past 10 people that you've texted, just look at that. And I want you, as you're looking at these people, to think about how diverse is it? Like, think about their national origin. Are they from somewhere else in the world? Are they their physical abilities, learning abilities, gender, age, socioeconomic class, religion, spiritual orientation, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race? You know, so when you're looking at these 10 people, your go-to people, just what does that look like? And then just ask yourself, how can I diversify it? You know, this is just a baseline. Okay, this is where I'm at. All right, this is where I was put in the world. This is where I'm at, but how do I move from that? And so this activity, I also want you to think about, you know, when you go back to your social media, just look at how diverse that is. And then start to just work from there. Just, okay, I need to read more books. I need to watch different movies that are about other lives. I need to join groups. I need to maybe move from where I'm at, you know, and the most important thing is the people that you're hanging around with in your network, do they reflect the children that you're teaching? Because that's an important thing. If you don't know what's going on in the daily lives of people and how the world is perceiving them and their struggles, it's going to be hard to connect. So definitely do all you can throughout the summer to diversify your pool of people in your network.
So what we provided here is a list of key takeaways for how you can continue to transform yourself and work along that continuum. And some we've already discussed, and others may be new things to be thinking about. So befriending those whose intersectionality is different from yours is what Syda just took us through the exercise. Uncovering, naming, sitting with, and talking about your biases with others is another approach. Shopping at Black-owned businesses and restaurants, and reading about the contributions of inventions, accomplishments of Black and Brown people. These are just some ways that we encourage you all to kind of take the next step in transforming yourselves.
Okay, so this next section is going to talk about building your community. So we just finished talking about, okay, what are some things about at the individual level? Now we're moving into community. And so in order for us to transform our community and just our environment or the way things function, we first have to understand it. And where did it stem from? So axiology, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but Dr. Edward Nichols developed this framework. And it looks at the primary value system of different cultural groups. And if you ever get a chance to see Dr. Joy DeGruy, her presentation on this is amazing, And that's the first time that I ever heard of this. And it was life-changing for me because it helped me understand how the world functions and how I function in that world. Because before I was walking around all the time thinking like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I can't get that right. And I don't know what's this and I don't know what's that. And everything was just foreign to me. And so once I learned about this, I said, I'm not the dummy. I just function differently. My family just functions differently, but we're being punished because we're being held accountable to a different cultural value system. And so once I understood that, I felt this sense of liberation and freedom and saying, okay, I can be myself and I shouldn't be ashamed of that. So it's important for us to understand what is our environment. And we function on a European model that is based on member to object. Now this whole framework is like a day-long training. So I'm just going to give you a snippet just for you to look deeper into. And so the European axiology, the highest value system is from member to object. So thousands of years ago, it was member to food. In America, it is member to job. And you can look at all the research, when white males, retire 2 years after they die. It's because we have such a strong identity to the job. This is who we are. And so that highest value lies in that. And that's how a lot of things function. We know a thing, and again, I'm just looking at the European axiology. So the epistemology is we know something through counting and measure. Counting and measure. If we cannot count it and measure it, it doesn't exist. There's no need for it. And so that's how the arts get cut out. That's how social emotional learning is a new thing because we didn't need it before, just, and so counting and measuring. And this is why so many Black and brown children don't do good on the testing, don't do good with our system that we set up in school because it's very counting and measuring. And we don't function like that. And when I say we, people of color, the logic is either or. You're either in it or you're out. In it or out. There's no gray. And then the last one I can't see because of the way the thing is. Nilufar, can you read the last box?
Here it says technology. All sets are repeatable and reproducible.
Yeah. So once we see something that's successful, of course, we got to make it bigger. We got to make it larger. We got to multiply it. We got to keep growing. And we see that in our economy. We see that the way America functions. We got to keep growing, multiplying, making things bigger. And so all of that is how America functions. That's how our education system functions. That's how we bring value to everything. So if you don't fit within that, then there's no need for you. And then that's where people of color start to have these feelings of low self-esteem and vacant esteem. We start to feel invisible because we're literally getting cut out because we don't fit in this way of thinking. And so I just want to spend another minute looking at the other ones. So African American, Latinx, Arab, they function member to member. So the membership, partnership, collaborations, that's very important. Do I like this person? If I don't like them, I'm not going to move forward. Please don't make me work with them. I don't like, my teacher doesn't like me. You know, so those things start to play. If there is not a relationship that's involved with the students, then you can't move forward. You could give that child so many stars, but if they feel you don't like them, they won't care. They won't care. An A means nothing. An F means nothing. What is valuable to the children is, do you like me? And so if the teacher walks in with any kind of fear or any, oh, I don't want to be here, or I hate, the children feel that. They feel that and they don't want to be there. But because they're children, they're forced. And we're forcing them to code switch to this European model without giving our children any kind of training. We're not preparing our babies because the parents most of the times don't know what's going on. And so we send our children just holding on, please don't injure my child. And so the teacher functioning from this way of being is triggering all the time. And so the children are always trying to figure things out. And by the time they become teenagers, we've lost them. And now we're wondering, why is the graduation rate so low? Why are these scores so low? And then just looking at the Asian American, Polynesian, the highest value lives member to group. So now what happens if we have a teacher functioning European, member to object, all about individuality, and you have an axiology that is member to group? So I see this. I looked at my area was Chinatown when I was a FACE manager, and I saw this disconnect where the teacher is all about, oh, you know, great, you did so good. I'm going to give you an award on stage, and I'm going to put you up on the board saying that you are an A student, and it's all about the individual upliftment. But if your axiology is member to group, that is going against the principles of what your goal is. And so member to group is, I am a part of the group, and when I move forward, all of us move forward. All of us will gain that recognition, all of us. But again, children cannot articulate this and go against authority. And so a child's not going to say, well, no, I don't want that. Don't put my name up there. But in that, there's this sense of shame. So we need to be careful with how we're carrying things out. And Native, last thing, is member to great spirit. If what we're learning in society is not part of the whole interconnectedness of the earth and entire humanity, what is the point? What is the point? And because of the history of our Native brothers and sisters, there's the highest suicide rate right now. And that's somewhere that we really need to focus and figure out, how are we failing our children in that population, and all of them. So I just want to, of course, you know, this again is a whole day long conversation that we can have, but I just wanted to get us thinking about, you know, how are we helping our teachers learn the language and the habits and cultural identities of the different groups, instead of making our children conform and code switch on a daily basis to the European model. So that is something that we all have to figure out together, because that's the damaging and triggering that's going on in our schools. I think that's it. Okay.
Thank you.
I went over my 6 minutes, but hope it was helpful.
Perfect. Thank you. So keeping that in mind, let's dive into CASTLE, because one of the best approaches for building community in your classroom is by explicitly and implicitly teaching social emotional learning. And this is the iconic CASTLE wheel that CPS calls the gold standard for teaching the beliefs, attitudes, skills, and knowledge that both adults and students need to be successful in their academic, professional, and personal lives. And again, for those of you who maybe haven't seen this before, there are 5 competencies, the 2 in orange, 2 in green, and 1 in yellow. The 2 in orange are all about knowing oneself. The 2 in green is all about knowing others. And then the yellow is about how do we create, knowing how to create together, right? So that's kind of the flow of the way we inherit these skills. So about 2 years ago, CASTLE published a brief to analyze the current SEL research and implementation that's happening, to try to figure out how to tie this work with mitigating racial oppression in the US, because they felt like really ultimately, if this is going to be effective with our Black and brown children, we need to think about that history, right? And so CASTLE saw the need to use the cultural assets of Black and brown communities to basically cultivate and leverage the cultural assets of Black and brown communities to create inclusive, multicultural school environments that would help youth reach their fullest potential. Because if they, since, you know, if we're not meeting the needs of the population that we serve in a language, in a manner that they can relate to, like Syda was saying in the axiology, then we've lost our population. You could be teaching the most amazing lesson, curriculum, standards, but if those Black and brown children don't feel seen, heard, and valued, nothing is going to stick. It's going to go over their heads. So, so next slide is where we talk about how we can redefine SEL as a tool for social action. And again, by creating a learning environment that values, respects, and affirms Black and brown students' culture, identity, interests, talents, and backgrounds. This quote here from Kaylor Jones really kind of summarizes it beautifully. True SEL is about understanding our relationships with ourselves and with others. It's to know ourselves as holistic human beings and to be able to see the humanity in others, to fight together for the world we deserve, which is rooted in equity and justice. So this is the ultimate goal. This is what we're hoping to create when we are teaching SEL. And in this slide, you'll see that I came up with 5 steps to this end, using the information from the sources below, in order to really give teachers a clear kind of blueprint on how to get our SEL instruction transferable to Black and brown children in our classrooms so that it's received in an authentic way. I also am very mindful of the time and we have more to cover. So I leave these steps with you. I encourage you all to come back and review them because they do really capitalize on everything that we have talked about to this point, and it provides like a specific process by which we can translate this into reality. Is that okay, Syda and Sarah, if I keep going? Okay. So to summarize the building community, these are the key takeaways that we again hope that you can take with you, think about, and implement tomorrow and also in the fall when you see your students again. But just to highlight a few, again, see, hear, and celebrate your Black, Brown, and Indigenous students and their families by recognizing their power, by recognizing the fact that this country was built on the backs of slaves, and the land that we all occupy was taken from the hands of the Indigenous. So we need to be aware of our history so that when we are communicating with the students of color, that we are aware of the power they brought into this country and the power they currently have. We have to value the intellectual contributions of Black students and earn the trust of their families by listening to their ideas and concerns. Listening is a really key part of this work, and intervening when unmet basic needs arise. So we're not like turning an eye or thinking like that's not my problem or I can't help you, but really listening and collaboratively figuring out how we can resolve the problems that they're facing in a holistic way. So, and again, there are more takeaways here. We encourage you to revisit these. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we just completed talking about transformation in the community, and now we're moving into the institutions, things to think about. So here, so at the institutional level, we don't want you to really think about like the district of CPS, but really the school system, but then how our families are relating to the school system, because they're not always interacting with the district, they're interacting with the school. And so we have to understand and think about all the time, how do the larger institutions impact our families, because that's going to be their response to the school, because those are repeated behaviors, accusations, scenarios that they're always interacting with. And so unless we know the larger scenario of what's happening to Black and Brown families and students, we're not going to be able to capture their story or have compassionate hearts. We're just going to say, just like Nilufar said, like, that's too much for me, I don't want to deal with it. But it's about knowing. So knowing the deep history of harm between the institution of education and people of color, what can educators do to earn the trust of parents who are the product of this history? How does our knowledge of the school to prison pipeline, mass incarcerations, and executions of unarmed Black people impact our interaction with families who are victims of these racist systems? And Nilufar, can you read the last one just because?
Sure. Sure. And then finally, how are you intentionally and strategically seeking to interrupt that status quo of racism?
Yeah, so just keep in mind, you know, for a Black and Brown mother or parent, them sending their child out every single day, just them leaving the house is a stressful act. It's a stressful, I don't know what's going to happen to my child once they leave my sight every day. So them dropping them off at your school is a stressful act for them. So just keep that in mind. How do you relieve that stress? How do you make it so comfortable for them that when they leave them there, they can trust that my child's going to be okay? And so I don't know if you're familiar with targeted universalism or the framework that the CPS Equity Office came up with, but just some background. If you can Google CPS Equity Office. They were established about 1.5 years ago. It's there's 4 main staff, and then they have some interns and part-time helping them. But what they're doing right now is they're combing through the entire system. They're looking at policies. They're looking at how the different departments are running. They're looking at the curriculum. They're looking at the paintings that are in the schools. They're looking at everything through a just and equity lens and trying to understand, how does this painting impact or trigger our students of color, from the Native and Indigenous background, from the Black and from the white and from the Latinx and the Asian. How does this one thing, I need to now keep in mind everything, the entire system, how does it impact every student or family member that walks through the building? So, so this is something that they came up with. It's called targeted universalism. And the question is, what short and long-term solutions will support different groups of students to reach the same universal goal? So it's a short film.
I'd say let's not show it.
Not show it? Okay.
Yeah, just because we have 5 minutes.
Oh, we have 5 minutes? Okay.
We still haven't done questions, so
okay. All right. So
let's go to the last, the alderman.
okay.
So one more thing, and I just to keep it short, I think that besides advocating for anti-racist practices in your school building or your district, also think about expanding your impact by getting involved in your school's neighborhood. And this is an amazing document that we came across as we were preparing for this. In 2019, the Center for Racial and Gender Equity released this scorecard, which literally graded every alderman in the city on these 6 areas, these 6 key topics that they call the racial justice policy topics. And if you can believe it, of the 50 aldermen, only 9 received A's. Speaking of the European model of counting and measuring, 9 received A's and 9 received F's. So if you want to really take an anti-racist stand to improve policy and legislation and how things are decided for our city in particular, know your aldermen, get involved, attend their monthly town hall meetings, attend their weekly drop-in hours, you know, get their newsletter and become familiar with like what work the alderman is doing, because the more that you can support leaders who are anti-racist, the more we'll be able to, again, move along that continuum and shift the way things are done in this country to benefit all people and not just currently those who have power or privilege. Again, that's kind of a summary. The link is there. You can always go back and take a look at it. And then again, more key takeaways of how to disrupt racist policy, how to get involved in the institutional level that we're encouraging you to read through. And Syda, do you want to talk about that last page?
Okay, so just partner with Black students to target and eliminate discriminatory. Actually, can you
go to the next page?
Okay. All right. Yeah. So here's some. Sorry. So here is a resource page. Definitely keep learning. Keep diving into what we talked about. There's some articles here that you can look at. We have documentaries and TED Talks. Of course, there are lots. So once you look on there, it'll generate what other movies you can look at that are similar to this. And then some organizations that you can join, get on their newsletter so that you can see what activities, what capacity building and training things that you could be a part of. And so definitely take a look at that slide. Follow us on Organic Oneness because we are always networking, rebuilding community, and figuring this out together.
Thank you all. So sorry we went over, but I hope it was helpful information.
It was great. Thank you both so much. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, and we really appreciate you being here. You know, it's an uncertain, unsettled time, but there's a lot of potential, and we're really thankful that for especially our sort of, last community chat of the school year series, and then our kickoff into summer, where we will be continuing to do some of these community chats, but it'll be sort of a different format and different timing, but it makes a lot of sense. So I'm really thankful that you both were able to join us today. So we only have a couple more minutes, but we had a bunch of questions came in through the registration site. And a lot of them are sort of aligned with each other. There will be questions certainly that we won't be able to address here. And so just for everyone on the call, in addition to the recording of the session itself, the PowerPoint file, and any resources that were shared, we will also have responses, both Syda's and Nilufar's responses to the questions that weren't addressed verbally today. So you will have all of that at your disposal, and we'll send a link to all of that out early next week. So one thing that came up a couple of times that I think is really interesting, and I'd love for you to address it, how can anti-racist practices be explicitly implemented daily without it feeling contrived or surface level? Would you recommend this being part of developing class norms? Sort of what's your perspective on that?
I can definitely kick it off, Syda, and then if you want to add, I would say what can easily be done daily is your own individual efforts, right? Like when we were talking at the beginning about what you can do to kind of transform your mindset and your unconscious bias or your automatic thinking that's influenced by the way society has been structured and communicating to us. Every day, taking that time to really reflect and think and learn something about our history, something about other cultures, something about your neighborhood, about how legislation is made, about just really taking the time to do a deeper dive into even some of these concepts that we talked about today, so that it becomes part of your conscious enough that it will naturally and organically arise in conversations that you might have with your neighbor, with your colleagues, with, whenever you see that microaggression happening or that subtle racism that so many of us stay silent about because it feels uncomfortable. We don't know how to respond. The courage to respond and to intervene and be a voice and an advocate for those who are historically either oppressed or historically the ones who always have to defend themselves versus people who are in privilege defending them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also add, figure out like how to not make it about yourself. How ask the children. So those of us that are teachers, ask the children, what would be a fun way to start our day and end our day? And let them cultivate that, because then it becomes a community co-created space. If you walk in on day one and you have your agenda, you set everything, you guys, when I used to be a PE teacher, and on day one, it was getting to know each other. What do you want to do throughout the year? And we'd plan the entire thing. Of course, I'd set it up, each month there has to be a different subject. What subject do you want to go deep on? What, and they created it. And of course, I incorporated what they needed to learn in that. But now it was they wanted to teach their own lessons. They brought in, oh, this is what I do. Can I show everybody how I do a layup and all that stuff? So now it becomes a co-created space that incorporates everybody's wants, needs, and likes and habits.
Mm-hmm. I love how Syda, her answer was exactly what personalized learning teaches. So thank you for advocating for our department.
So before we go, I think just one more question, and obviously people can pop off if they need to, but how might the e-learning, sort of the distance learning environment, change an educator's ability to have these conversations? So we don't really know, guidelines came out. We're not totally sure what's going to happen with CPS in the fall. There's still a lot very much up in the air. And even if we do go back physically in the fall, there's a chance that at some point next school year or at some point in the future, we will be distance learning again for whatever reason. So how would you, just real quick, sort of some high level recommendations of how to have these conversations in a virtual space.
Go for it, Syda.
So this is actually an amazing opportunity because the children are now in their own environment, right? They didn't need to leave their comfort place. They didn't need to leave and go into a building. Now they're at home amongst their family. So they're wrapped up in how they do things. So I would, this is a suggestion, ask them simple things that everyone can share and everyone can learn each other of, just like, okay, I see you're sitting on your couch, you know, while you're on the thing. Does anybody have a different word for couch? What do you say? Do you say sofa? Do you say, you know, is there a different word in a different language that you use? You know, what, describe to me what's going on in your, do you have artwork up? Okay, is that from anywhere? Is there a painter in your family? So start to change everything into a very, you know, this is the child's learning environment now. Have them really reflect on who they are and sharing that with everybody. Because in that sharing, everyone's going to learn about each other in a way that the classroom doesn't allow us to. So if you can really think about, like, okay, we gotta get to this math, you know, problem. They got to figure out this algebra, whatever. You know, think of how can the children use their environment to get to that goal, and then they can all talk about that experience together.
I want to add to the first week of June, which was right after we had like the uprising, civil unrest, and all of the stuff that was happening in the media. I coached teachers, and so in all of my conversations with teachers that week and the week after, they said students were so engaged. They were so involved in the remote learning at that time because they wanted to talk about what was happening. They wanted to be part of the solution. They wanted to increase their understanding of how we got here. Like, they were so immersed just because of what's happening in current events that it's actually quite easy, I think, to bring up these conversations, to have these conversations with them, especially at this time. So in a sense, it's sort of it's a blessing in a way that we are in the situation we're in, because students are living it. They're in that reality, and this is a great opportunity to explore that and heal together.
Great. Well, thank you again both so much for joining us today. I'm sure we could have had this as like a 4-hour community chat. So thank you for paring it down as much as possible in a 70-minute time frame. And thank all of you for joining us. If you have any questions that weren't addressed or ideas you have for future chats. So again, we are planning on continuing to do this throughout the course of the summer, not on a weekly basis, but periodically. And there's a very good chance that we'll pick it back up again on a more regular basis in the fall. We've just seen so much engagement and interest, and we've had some incredible presenters. So it's been a really nice addition to our programming slate. So if there's anything around those issues or ideas that you'd like to share with us, please do. Or if there's anything you just want to talk about, you just want to reach out, CFE is here for you now, and will be here for you in all of the weeks and months ahead. We are so thankful, especially for the educators in the group, for everything you've been doing the past several months. Challenging and overwhelming are not appropriate words for what it's been across the board. And our team values you and lifts you up as professionals, and we hope that you feel that wraparound hug and love and support from us. So thanks again. Happy Fridays, happy summers. Please take some time for yourselves and your families and your friends. And we hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.